was that archaeology strand which kind of started the whole process off, which consisted of archaeological digs, stripping the site, recording everything, and then putting it back into its natural environment, because they were going to be building quite a lot of new buildings round about that place, so the whole thing would have been lost if that hadn't happened. But as I understand it, that was part and parcel of the planning process for East Ayrshire Council anyway, so that, they had to do that. The other main strand was the oral history strand, which turned out to be probably the most important strand. That was interviewing people who had first-hand knowledge of either living, working or being born in Pennylands Estate, and that was fantastic, the amount of information we got off of people and the depth of the information we got, and the fantastic stories, some of them quite sad but some of them really funny as well. And then the third strand was the desk research and archival research strand, which sort of tied the three of them together. It backed up a lot of hard evidence about when the camp, the four different stages of the camp, and we managed to get some real evidence about when specific things happened round about the camp. But also, it was a really good sources for linking up some of the stories, the anecdotal stories that people told us through the oral history, and that really gave a bit more relevance and a bit more depth to what they were saying. Plus the fact that we found things that nobody else had even known about, but other stories that became sort of urban myths and surrounds in the local area, and we managed to find the source of the urban myths in most cases. So that was a really important way of bringing everything together. 4 distinct phases. There was the first phase, which was it was called Pennylands Barracks, which was the training camp for Allied and British troops. But it did start off as a tented camp, and then it became they built it especially for the prisoners of war. After that, the prisoners of war were moved in, but a lot of these things run in parallel. I think the camp was split into two at one point, where the Allied troops were still there being trained, but the prisoners of war, the Italians, were the first prisoners there. After the prisoners of war petered out and at the end of the war and they were repatriated home, it became a repatriation camp for Polish soldiers who weren't prisoners of war. They were released from Germany and various other places throughout Europe. And then shortly after that, it became an overspill housing camp that Ayr County Council took over for local families, because after the war the housing shortage was really quite severe all over Britain. But we did find, when we were doing the research and listening to people's stories, that some of these timelines actually crossed over. So it wasn't one day it was a prisoner of war camp, the next day it was the Polish soldiers, the repatriation camp. It's like everything else in life, there was merging and gaps and stuff. So, but we're still finding things out even just now, nearing the end of the project. So,
Pennylands Camp was a transit camp actually originally. What they did, they actually brought the regiments in and they gave them a bit of training. There was a firing range down at the bottom, and they used to take them up onto Ayers Moss, and in fact there were a couple of boys falling late were actually killed by a hand grenade that they'd found up in Ayers Moss. I can actually relate back to it. I was only about 200 yards off them when they pulled the pin, and 2 of them get killed in it actually. We used to come about Pennylands Camp as more or less children, because my brother was 12 and I would be 8 at the time. We were coming about Pennylands Camp, and nobody ever bothered you, really. We used to go, mainly we were looking for birds' eggs, but on one occasion, coming up the side of the river, we were there when it was the Frenchman that was there at the time. They blew up a tree with a landmine. They were demonstrating this to the soldiers, and we were there at the time when it happened. And another occasion, they actually threw a hand grenade in to kill the fish. I actually saw it happening. They didn't get many fish, but they did try it anyway. And as far as the firing range goes, I believe that they're still there, but they're covered over now. But the firing ranges, you could pick up the empty shell cases when they were finished, because it was out with the camp boundaries. But you could actually pick up the shell cases and exchange them at the school for something or other. Sort of barter system.
Oh yes, that's we didn't really mention that. A lot of the prisoners of war were allowed out in farms. They were transported apparently by the milk lorry. The Houston's and Brothers milk lorry would take them. And they didn't even seem to necessarily have any guards with them. They would be dropped off at the road end and walk up to the farm. Some people went regularly to the same farm, and others, it was just at times of the harvest and when there was a lot of work to be done, they would have extra people. And they seem to have got on very well with the farmers, and we've at least 2 stories of them writing to people once they've gone back to Germany, keeping in touch with the families that they'd been with. A lot of respect on both sides, I think.
Well, I grew up on a farm between Ochiltree and Cumnock, and my father, towards the end of the war, had prisoner of war come to work to help with certain parts of the harvest. And I know that we had Italian prisoners of war come from Pennylands. I do know that the Italian prisoners were brought in a vehicle, and each group of prisoners left at the farm were guarded by a guard with a gun, which, you know, we all felt. And I was not allowed to go out and about when they were around. And what I do remember is that one shocking incident when one of the prisoners came up to my mother in the yard and threw a plate of food down on the ground and said that they did not eat pig food. And that dinner was the same dinner that we were having in the kitchen, because the main meal was cooked at midday on the farms then, because we were up early and had breakfast early. So the main meal was at lunchtime, and it would probably be something like soup and then tatties and meat and vegetable. And it was served, the soup came and then it was served, the meat and vegetables probably onto the same plate, but it was exactly the same that we served to the prisoners of war who were working. The Italians didn't come for a long period, as I recall, and they were followed by German prisoners of war. Now, I don't remember much about the group of Germans, but as we neared the end of the war, the German prisoners were obviously chosen, and we had an older Austrian and a young German who came and lived on the farm. Now, that must have been through the spring planting in 1945. I remember them very well because I still can't recall the name of the older one, but he carved wood and made these Pekin chickens on a round bat. He had obviously worked with wood in Austria, and he made toys and jointed them with bits of rubber he found around the farm. And they went to the village children and whatnot. He was very friendly. Rudy, the young man, was very superior. I don't think he was an officer or anything, but he was very German and kept himself apart. But they lived in what we called the bothy. Now, this was a room which had a fire in it, and it had 2 bunk beds. And I've never forgotten that they decorated it. And they used the leftover paint from the farm gates and fences. So there was a really strong dark green and a silver paint. And they had a double line round the top of the wall, and they stippled the walls with green and silver with a sponge.
There were stories of the French soldiers that were there in, I think it was in 1944.
1944, that's right.
What were the stories about them?
Right. Well, we've heard that they seem to have been a wild bunch. I'm not sure that this is entirely justified, but the stories were they were fairly lively. There's stories, unsubstantiated stories of them jumping off Town Hall balcony, the Cumnock Town Hall balcony at the dances. There's also unsubstantiated stories of them training to parachute off Ballochmyle Viaduct. But there's a lot of the Polish soldiers married locally, and Elizabeth Parol knew them all and helped peace in them. Some of them moved on, but a lot stayed in the area. But of that generation, I think Elizabeth or Betty is the only one still alive that we've come across so far.
But the next door neighbour was Polish, and that when I started walking, and it was just like the entrance there, it was the three doors, Ken, my gran's, Mrs Skinner's and my mum's. My mum was in a single inn, and I just went in there for it was a good feeding house, and it was all Polish stuff. She couldn't speak English, and she couldn't, and she started speaking to me in Polish, and the result was I learned to speak Polish. So I went to the dancing, and I was in the dancing, and I was kind of shy. I mean, I didn't know, like my younger sister that was jiving in the middle of the floor, and see, I was sitting, and he come over and asked me to dance. He's a military policeman, and I used to see him coming in and just standing and looking around about him to see who he was in and who would cause trouble, for he knew I were in. He come over and asked me to dance. So I went up to dance with him, and I says to him, "Are you enjoying the dance?" He said, "Ja nie rozumiem cię." I don't understand you. And I says, "Oh, I never feel this. I'm not wanting him to care I can speak Polish." But anyway, I says, "Oh no, that's signaling something." So I danced with it, and I says, "Ja rozumiem. I can understand." That was it. Those two words, that was it. So he walked me up the road, and I turned him into the house, Gran and Grandpa. And so they made him offer welcome, and the door's open for you. And a year went by, and then he did ask me out to the pictures. I always remember it. And that was it. We went with one another. We got married.
Well, the gun, what happened was that there was, in the days you made your own entertainment, so I had my Agnes and Basilia, who were younger than me, and the set of pram wheels, you could take the big Walson cross pram, you know, the springs come up like that, and you put a board on it. What you did was, my two sisters got on the back of it, and I was driving it, and you could actually slew it around either way. And I was going down, and the next thing I see is this young chap near the bottom, and he does this, and then you seen the wee puff of smoke, and the bullet hit the wheel and burst it. So the bogey went off, threw us off, so picked himself up and away down, and we managed to get the hood of the gun off him, because he was in shock of what had happened. His cell got a fright, so I turned the gun off him, and my sisters, we walked up, left the bogey and walked up to the warden's office and handed in the gun, and then that's how it was in the Daily Express.
To the stories of the youngsters who lived in the camp, because of the time scale, most of our interviewers were people that had actually lived in the housing stage of the camp, and some of them just had an idyllic childhood, or I'm sure their parents didn't think it was that idyllic, but the children thought it was a wonderful playground. They had a great big wood to explore, a river to play in, old ruined houses to explore and things like that. And they seem to have had really generally very happy memories. Their parents, I'm sure, were less enamoured, but I don't know, perhaps it was the height of the best kind of housing available. The alternative, I think, at that time was for young married people after the war was they moved in with their parents. So it was an improvement. They had a place of their own. It might not have been most luxurious, but It was their own, and they made the most of it. They seemed to acquire things from other parts of the camp. They made use of things. They made improvements. And in fact, some of them got charged with stealing things, which seems a bit harsh because really it was stuff that nobody wanted that they were making use of to improve their houses when the council weren't doing anything. So I felt a bit sorry about that.
And a hut to start with invasive roofs and that. It was okay, we managed. But when we moved to the top of the camp, next to Christie's, we moved to a jail block, which was brick, like a brick prefab. And it was amazing. It was amazing when we went into it with the over stove, with the kitchen, and with a fireplace in one bedroom, and an over stove in the living room. So the place was warm. It was warm. Outside toilet.
So the first house was a Nissan hut sort of thing?
No.
It
It was a felt and outside and corrugated. Across for us was wash houses with spigots and what you see in the geofilm films where men could wash 10 or 12 at a time. Cold water.
Did you have a garden at all?
Beautiful. My father loved the garden. So did my father-in-law. He loved the garden.
And were there any shops on site, do you remember?
No, it was a van that came round every morning, a grocer's van, and I think there was a baker's van. Maybe the grocer's van carried soda scones and rolls and milk. I'll tell you the name of the van, it was Johnny Stewart. He's not like now, he'll be in his 80s.
So the second house, it didn't have running water either, or did it?
We put the running water in. We didn't put running water in the kitchen.
And was there electricity then?
No, there was no electricity in the camp. No. It was the tele lamps. You'd pump the tele lamps and a mantle on them. And with day lamps with what you see in the Western films. It was a playground. The Marks of Butte, we were doing there every day of the week. Played down there, swung for trees, fit as fiddles. One bike between 3 years. And it was built up and painted.
I was here at the beginning and I was here at the end, more or less. When the camp was being built, it was built with labourers from Glasgow who were too old to join the forces. And we actually had 2 of these joiners as lodgers. So they were at the very beginning building the camp, which must have been about 1940. I continued visiting the camp more or less until the prisoners came. Then I demolished a couple of the huts which I bought from Ayr County Council for £5 each to build a garage of the asbestos that was on them. Now the huts themselves, I believe they came from Canada. They were prefabricated from Canada and shipped across here, just the same as what Bullockmile Hospital was, the same construction. As I say, it was at that time, most of the camp was empty. It was 1957 because 1957 was the Suez Crisis, when you're allowed to drive a lorry or a car with L plates up and nobody beside you. So I had borrowed the lorry, so I know definitely it was 1957. I'd borrowed the lorry to carry the slabs and the asbestos over the weekend that we demolished the 2 huts. The rest of the huts, as far as I could gather, were actually Nissen huts made of corrugated iron. They just disappeared. I don't know whether local scrapmen would get them or not, but they just disappeared from sight.
How long did it take you to demolish the
Oh,
huts?
just a weekend. It was a weekend. We saved the asbestos off the roof, and by that time there was very little cladding left on the sides of the buildings, because the buildings were made out of, if I can remember correctly, about 5x2 timbers covered with sarking boards and then covered chicken wire and some plaster. A cheap way of building them. And because everybody in the camp at the time, the people that had come to live in the camp, they were actually burning the timber, any timber they could get, just to keep warm, I suppose, because the only heating in the huts was a couple of pot-belly stoves.
Who authorised demolition?
Oh, you could actually buy, as I say, you could actually buy the huts from Ayr County Council. Ayr County Council had taken it over it seems, because they were actually charging rent for some of the Nissen huts. I think it was about 50 pence a week at that time. They were charging for the rent of the... There was no houses being built at the time, or they were getting built, but any newly married that was looking for, were staying in rooms, I suppose. They just had moved into the camp and used it as... And it became quite popular because there were people from all over Ayrshire were actually staying here.